And Audrey Tong, co-author, will be joining on for Q&A on a live stream from Taiwan. So very exciting. I wanted to tell you just a little bit about Plurality Institute and also introduce our co-host. So Plurality Institute is a hub for the plurality research community. We're an interdisciplinary organization. And want to introduce some of our co-hosts just to hear a little bit about their organizations. Matt?
Thanks so much. So my name is Matt. I'm president of Radical Exchange Foundation. We are very happy to be a co-host with the Plurality Institute, and we're a small nonprofit. We got started about 5 years ago. Glen is our founder, and it's been my privilege to lead the organization for most of the time since then. We have a wonderful community that we'd also, like to invite everyone in this room to participate in. There's a lot of interesting sort of overlap and intersection between the kinds of questions that we focus on. Radical Exchange is sort of our main focus is thinking about the basic institutions of markets and democracy. So we think about, very particularly about questions relating to ownership and property and intellectual property and voting systems and how to make those kinds of basic rails of the society work better. We bring together lots and lots of wonderful people from academia, from activist circles, from technology and more. We have community calls on the first Wednesday of each month. We have a newsletter which you can sign up for at radicalexchange.org, and we put on really, really wonderful events that I'm sure most of you would enjoy. A couple weeks ago we had about 80 people from around the world, or more than that, 90 or so people from around the world talking about property and ownership in Oakland. Which was wonderful, thanks in no small part to Kalia, who helped us host it. That's it. Just want to invite you all to be in touch, reach out to me, and we'd love to involve any of you all in the work we're doing. Thanks. Radicalexchange.org. Radical Exchange with no E in exchange. Radical letter X, change.org.
One thing that's awesome about the plurality space is all the orgs are very collaborative, not surprisingly, and really excited to have Radical Exchange as our sister organization. And also we have Dare from AI Objectives Institute.
Hi everyone, my name is Dayar. I am the president of AI Objectives Institute. The institute actually was founded by a book that Glen has written a while ago on radical markets. That was the starting inspiration. What we do is, the core question that motivates us is, how can AI tools augment human agency, both on an individual level, on a collective level, and on a systems level? And this involves us to run new socio-technical experiments in which we can try how new tooling can actually affect ways in which we are coordinating. Especially, how can we accommodate different perspectives that exist? How will different perspectives interfere or coexist or collaborate with each other, especially when they are subject to different incentive gradients. Our goal is to run experiments on this in real life, not just to be able to produce academic papers, but to be able to actually make change. So some of our work involves how can we help, for example, unions negotiate better on understanding what are the critical points, or how can we have blockchain DAOs come up with better policy making, more so on the collective alignment aspect. Our hope is that the AI revolution that is taking place is actually in service for the communities that would actually benefit from it the most. So we like building things. If you're interested in prototyping and making things, come talk to us. We work on augmenting moral learning systems for AI, so that AI representatives on various sources, both for an individual or for a collective, would be able to interact better, and collective intelligence applications for scalation. And the third avenue of research on systems level has to do with how market dynamics will be shifting, be it from supply chain efficiency augmenting with AI, or introducing further risks. So if any of that is interesting, come find me. Our website is ai.objectives.institute.
Awesome. And next up, we have Allison from Foresight Institute.
Thanks, Rose. It's really nice to be here again. Yeah, I run Foresight Institute, which some of you have been to our events already in like the 1990s, so I'll spare some of you that. But we really try to support kind of like science and technology that is perhaps a little bit undervalued, too interdisciplinary, too ambitious for legacy institutions to support. We focus on longevity bio, molecular machines, neurotechnology, and AI. And you may ask why the hell I'm at a plurality event. And I think it's because we have a really pluralistic approach to science and tech development. And I think that really kind of is almost the DNA that goes through the whole organization. There's a ton of disagreements about risks and promises of each of these fields. Each of these fields we're trying to develop in a pretty open way. And so I think plurality for me is kind of the meta value that kind of underpins the kind of science and technology that we're trying to spearhead. And I joined last year's conference, which was absolutely amazing. And I'm really, really delighted just to see how it turned from this like, what is the space of plurality, into like a bunch of conference sessions and like people checking in with each other on how their projects are going. So congrats on a really wonderful event. And thanks for having me be a small part of it. If you want to talk more hard science and tech, including our events and so forth, I'm happy to chat, but I'm really, really happy to be here, and that was fantastic.
Thank you, Allison. And co-host, stay close, because I'm going to call you up at the very end to do one very quick co-host picture. Okay, next we have Goodly Labs.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brigham Adams from the Goodly Labs. I am the founder and chief scientist and least skilled engineer on the team. We are an R&D lab, or a nonprofit lab that builds civic tech and democracy tech that we put directly into people's hands to confront major societal challenges like misinformation or relationships between police and communities, or simply deliberating and making decisions online at various scales. Our tech could definitely be called pluralist technology. We're really collaborative, and we try to bring in a lot of different voices, even across difference. And we're quite well known for collaborating. We do a lot of collaborations, even with folks who are here today. In particular, we have some governance technology that we're working on, but we found at the last year of this conference that there were many other teams working on governance technology with really good hearts, really good minds, and really great ideas that were different from ours. And we figured out, with the help of plurality, that we can pull together and kind of do these incubation cohorts where we do our R&D in front of each other and find an omni-win solution for humans, the global maximum set of governance tools. With that, please accept my thanks to you and everyone for having us, and let me hand off to our phenomenal COO, Melanie.
I'm the COO of Public Editor, which is the flagship product at Goodly Labs. We identify manipulative language in the news. So if you're looking at an article on our site, you'll see a score for the news article, and then you'll see inline explanations on how the language might manipulate you, whether it's showing a reasoning error, like the false dilemma, or it's using overly emotional language to create shock and sensation rather than inform. We identify that, and right now we're targeting articles that are related to the elections in Europe and then in the United States, and we're reposting on social media posts so people can get more informed on the news that they're consuming. We do this using collective intelligence tools, so we bring in students and civic society people into the platform. They use an app that's similar to Duolingo, super gamified, and they learn about manipulative language, and then they look at a short paragraph and they identify a subset of issues in that paragraph. We use a consensus model to make sure they found the same thing, and then we score the article with that, and we use that data to train AI to be able to do this type of identification in the future. And I think we also wanted to share that we are working on a civic conference which I think will have some similar elements to what you're seeing here at Plurality. We think there's a really big need for a voice in the zeitgeist about a positive future where we can see democracy flourish, where we can think about how we can use technology to work better as a people. And we want to bring that out into the zeitgeist. So we'll start with a conference that will bring together partners like all of you, as well as funders in the space to build awareness around funders, to funders. And then we want to do some press, start bringing the idea out into the public more. So come find us if that's something you're interested in.
And it's goodlylabs.org. Thank you, Rose.
And publiceditor.io.
Okay, last but not least, Jamie Joyce from Society Library, who's also our host in this beautiful space. Thank you, Jamie.
And I'm very happy that this is happening. Thank you for hosting this. So in our work at the Society Library, something that we've discovered is that in order to sufficiently understand a complex societal scale challenge, you may actually need thousands of pieces of relevant information. And that information is scattered, buried in government archives, hidden behind paywalls, somewhere lurking in the deep frontiers of Twitter. And so what the Society Library is doing is we are going out and collecting the arguments, claims, and evidence from pretty much every form of relevant media you can imagine on complex socio-political issues so that we can clean, curate, deduplicate, and logically structure essentially what are all the different positions we could take on complex policy issues and be able to see the evidence that supports or refutes each one. We take this data and we inform decision-making models, and we've even worked on computationally creating legislation well before LLMs could do this very easily. So we are currently automating our manual methods because we used to have a team of librarians scurrying through the internet and interacting with people in real life and calling up government offices to collect this information. Organization dedicated to the sincerity after truth, though never presuming we will actually find it. Thanks.
Do a pic with the audience too. Got to document. We have our photographer. Oh, come on. Co-host photo. Awesome. Okay, so now that we've all been waiting for, Glen, you can stay on stage. Author of Radical Markets, co-author of the new Plurality book on the future of collaborative technology and democracy, Glen Weyl.
Thank you, Rose. So this book is a collaboration between myself, Audrey Tong, the Digital Minister of Taiwan, who will be on the line shortly, and the world's first transgender minister, and a community of, at present, about 50 people around the world. I'll maybe talk a little bit later about what I mean by that, but it's an open source public collaboration. All of you are very, very welcome to contribute. The finalization of the English first print edition is Sunday, so you have a last chance to contribute before that goes to press. Okay, so this book responds to something that I don't even think in this audience I really need to cover very much, but technology currently have the most healthy relationship with each other. Technology is viewed widely as polarizing, misinforming, driving the breakdown in democratic consolidation around the world. On the other, maybe this part I do need to emphasize, but like technologists aren't so thrilled about how democracies are treating them either. So many technologists feel, oh, I shouldn't have this. I have the lavalier. That's the problem. Stupid me. Okay, sorry, Rose. You know, most technologists feel that most of what they get from democracies is like anger, frustration, negative vibes. Investment in technology, especially digital technology, as a share of GDP has been on a secular decline in liberal democratic countries really for the last several decades. And at the same time, you see, like, you know, authoritarian regimes building giant LLMs and open sourcing them and building cities that are designed for smart vehicles. So there's a lot of sort of negative feelings on the other side as well. Oh, that is not great. Okay. Oh, well. Okay. So you can't read those words, but that's okay. I'll explain myself. Our argument is that the reason that this conflict is occurring is that the two dominant ideologies that are kind of articulating and driving the direction of technological progress are inimical to democracy. What are those ideologies? One is what you usually hear in the AI space. Giant computers going to come and do everything for you. You'll get a UBI, and then you'll have the problem of figuring out what to do with all your free time. We take a name for that from the game Civilization VI, the best-selling strategy game of all time, where there are three future governments. One of them is synthetic technocracy, and is kind of built around this idea. The other narrative, and we associate this with people like Sam Altman and, you know, technologies like AI, the Ian Banks novels, et cetera. The second vision, which is very common in the crypto world, the Civ 6 name for that is corporate libertarianism. And this is very much like, you know, crypto, Mark Andreessen, EAC crowd, et cetera. The idea is that technology is going to like create all this privacy, protect us from any collective governance, and you know, make the whole world an anarcho-capitalist paradise or dystopia or whatever. Okay, we think that there's a third vision, which is not nearly as well articulated and is not like as present in the minds of the people who are driving tech today, but which actually underlies many more of the technologies we use today, like the internet and personal computing, and many of the most famous pop cultural objects like Star Trek. And the goal of this book is kind of to articulate that vision so that it can be competitive with these others. So it's useful in doing that to anchor us to something concrete. And Taiwan is an example of a place where this narrative of technology democracy being in conflict is like not so much the thing. In fact, in Taiwan, there's this movement Gov0, G0V, which basically downloads government websites, makes them better using the open source code mandates, puts them back up online at .g0v instead of .gov, and then shames the government into adopting them, which in fact the government liked enough that it took the leader of this movement and made her a minister in charge of overseeing the process of that happening, leading them to adopt a bunch of innovations very quickly from the civil sector during the pandemic, creating the world's best performance during the pandemic, during the COVID crisis, on both death rate and economic performance, no lockdowns whatsoever, and very few deaths. Another key element of this movement has been this thing, V-Taiwan. You guys have been hearing all day about like Polis and various things like this. V-Taiwan and Join are these platforms that Rose talked about, which allow large numbers of people to come together, have deliberative conversations, take the like 10% of the energy that gets turned into heat on social media and turn it into like practical solutions to public policy problems. They also use this to address the infodemic, using techniques that are maybe a little bit less sophisticated than what Goodly is doing, that Brigham and Melanie talked about, but are very similar in spirit. That has led them to have an election, January 13th, where they faced by a few orders of magnitude the most disinformation and most sophisticated disinformation ever launched per capita at any polity, and yet the outcome of the election actually was even more against the direction of the adversary than the polls had been predicting, and it was calm and consensual. This also shows up in the numbers. So Taiwan has the highest median living standard of any country with more than 10 million people in the world. It's an economy, it's the most tech-intensive economy in the world, so about 45% of GDP is technology exports. Like the median worker in Taiwan is like working in a semiconductor fab. So this is like pretty crazily tech-intensive, and yet you'd say, oh, well then it must be that they've got massively rising inequality, massively polarizing. No, in fact, Gini has been sort of declining or steady over the last decade, labor's share steady or rising, and they're ranked as the most healthy democracy by a number of indices in the world. Now, you might say, some people might say, a reaction I get very often is, well, they're a very homogeneous island, which is like a coded way of being like, oh, those Asians all get along with each other, right? But in reality, this is about as diverse and divided of a society as like exists in the liberal democratic world. So in 2014, what launched this whole digital democracy thing is that the national legislature of Taiwan was occupied for 3 weeks by a group of student protesters. And you all probably are aware of what 4 hours of occupation of our national legislature meant to us. So you can imagine what 3 weeks of occupation of the national legislature meant to them. And rather than that like leading to like huge social polarization, one of the leaders of this movement ended up as the minister in charge of like bringing all this stuff into the government more institutionally. But even 10 years after this, when I went in January to Taiwan for their election, the night before the election, I attended the rallies of the ruling party and the main opposition party, and rather than having slightly different logos like a elephant and a donkey, the flags that were being waved by the ruling party were green rainbow and pictures of the island. Not a single national flag anywhere. The opposition party was waving only the national flag. So, and in fact, the people who rule the island, the president of the island, effectively does not really even recognize the national flag or the name of the country. So that is imagine if rather than the Democrats and Republicans arguing over abortion, they were arguing over the American Revolution and whether that was a good idea or not. That is kind of the level of the division that exists within Taiwan. Furthermore, it is the second most religiously pluralistic society in the world and the first most religiously pluralistic society in the developed world. And it's been kind of traded back and forth between wildly different powers over the course of the last 400 years. Basically, only people of Polynesian origin who started from that island to spread out occupied it until 1600. It was then part of the Dutch Empire, the Qing dynasty, the Japanese Empire. So this is a pretty crazy place, and you'd think that this would lead to all sorts of, unhandleable conflict. And I think the right way to think about this is it used to be that when we saw fire burning from the ground, we would get blankets, put it out, and try to suppress it. and then we learn to drill for it instead, right? And like that is the key idea of plurality. So plurality, oh, great. Okay. This is so weird because usually this like weird font that I use up there has trouble, and these like normal fonts that I use down here don't, but you never know what these systems are going to do. So plurality can really be thought of in three ways. It's very much inspired, and this is why this was not just a pure nerd thing, by the Vulcan philosophy in Star Trek of infinite diversity and infinite combinations. This is the idea that all truth, beauty, and progress come from the union of the dissimilar. And it can be more precisely reflected in these three ways that we associate with these three thinkers. So first, plurality is a statement about the way the world is. It says the world is not a bunch of isolated individuals and a social whole, as like economists would model it or something. It is diverse, intersecting individuals and groups, with individuals having their identities formed by their group affiliations and groups having their identities formed by the individuals who make them up. And we represent that by this universal coded character, Unicode character, that you can use to represent plurality anywhere on any computer, which is these overlapping squares. Second, and we associate with this with the thought of Hannah Arendt, the mid-century philosopher who was the first to use plurality to represent a philosophy of this sort. Second is the idea which we associate with Danielle Allen, arguably the greatest living political philosopher, who in her work on connected society argues that we should view the potential energy in social diversity and society's ability to harness that potential energy as kind of the key measure of a good society. That what it is for society to prosper is to harness rather than dissipate the potential energy that comes from social diversity. And we represent that by this rainbow at the center. And finally, the idea which we associated with Audrey's thought is that the key role of digital technology is to build the engines that harness the potential energy of diversity that industrialism and nuclear technology did for fossil fuels and nuclear energy. So that is the role of digital technology, and we associate it with these two traditional Mandarin characters, Shu Wei, which in traditional Mandarin mean both digital and plural. So Audrey is both the digital minister and the minister of pluralism of Taiwan. So in order to have a society that, a digital society that reflects this, we need to have basic primitives. Our architecture of rights, our operating systems, and the thing that combines them, which is the shared internet protocols that we all have, that reflect these basic architectural features of what society is. And the most basic model for that is a hypergraph. What's a hypergraph? Hypergraph is like a normal social graph where you have links between different people, but rather than them being between people, they are between social communities. So not just two people, many people can be part of it. And we view kind of the fundamental open protocols that have to exist to support a plural society as being those that are necessary to represent a hypergraph. So you need a representation of individual identity, but not as an isolated thing, as a set of social affiliations that define an individual. You need a representation of social communities, but not one based on the notion of privacy or publicity, one based on the notion of self-governing communities that can have publicity internally and be protected from surveillance externally. You need the ability to represent the strength of connections within a community, and we view that as kind of the future of commerce and trust, and commercial exchange is representation of the strength of connections within a community. And then you need the ability for these to manage shared digital assets, data, compute, storage, etc. And finally, you need a way for people who are in the physical world to have universal access into this digital plural world. Those things together support the building of plurality. What does that mean? Plurality is cooperation across social difference. And the problem with cooperation across social difference is, of course, it's always easier to cooperate with those that are close to you or a small number of people, and much harder to do it at a distance. So there's always going to be a range of modalities that we use that have different trade-offs along this spectrum. And that ranges from very deep collaborations to very thin collaborations that span little or a lot of social distance. So that ranges from intimacy on the one hand all the way to capitalism on the other. And you can think of the depth of collaboration as being quantified by the bandwidth of the channel in that collaboration. So in intimacy, people share their own internal sensations of their own body with each other. In capitalism, they share a number, money, with each other. And in between, there's range of different things from natural language exchanges, multisensory immersion, etc. And the goal of plurality is at every point along this spectrum to push back that trade-off between depth and breadth of collaboration. And while there is no single objective that can quantify all of these, what we can say is the same basic logic applies from the most intimate and futuristic to the most simple and currently practical versions of this technology. And I want to illustrate that. So brain-to-brain communication, basically digitally enabled telepathy, could make intimacy far deeper than it currently is right now. People could actually share their thoughts directly with a partner. But at the same time, there's lots of research in psychology that shows that a main reason that children, as they grow older, lose the pluripotent imagination that they have in childhood is because they can't communicate that imagination to others. And so if we could have that kind of connection, yes, we could form deeper connections, but also we could allow far greater diversity and creativity to persist. On the other hand, approval voting, very simple voting mechanism where you can just choose multiple candidates rather than one. This allows for much more consensual choices where you get a candidate usually winning with 70% approval or something like that. And at the same time, it eliminates the spoiler effect and therefore allows a much broader range of political parties to coexist in the system. So again, opposite ends of the spectrum, both serving this plural goal. And we believe that because of that range of technologies, this can transform every sector of society. It can transform how we interact with the environment by creating not just plural communication within humans, but between non-humans and humans as well. We believe it can transform media by rethinking the basic architecture of social media to be supported by and highlighting the convergence of perspectives within a diversity of social communities rather than pigeonholing people and creating a sense of false consensus within a broader society. We believe that it can transform the workplace by giving new ways to fund entrepreneurship that are neither just capitalist, you go off and start your own entrepreneurial thing, nor bureaucratic. Instead, they allow people to come together across divisions of a company to serve the broader mission of that company. And we believe it can transform healthcare, giving us new models for insurance, new models for funding societal health rather than just individual level health interventions. And we believe that to support this, we need to fundamentally transform the architecture of how technology is developed. That technology has to become like the infrastructure that it is, supported by public investment and charitable investment that underpins a civic developed architecture just like it does in Taiwan that then is distributed by the private sector, but with the private sector playing a supporting role the same way it does in the development of most infrastructure. And that doing so will require new sets of taxes, coordination across many jurisdictions by digital ministers with transnational civil society organizations. And that movement will require activating every part of society. It will require cultural institutions to engage people in imagining a future like this, just like the Murai-kan Museum of Emerging Technology in Japan has done such an amazing job of, and as we're trying to do with the work of Oscar-winning director Cynthia Wade, who is making a film about Audrey's life. It's going to require the work of public sectors investing and adopting these tools, like the Colorado State Legislature, which uses some of these things to allocate its budget, India, which has been investing in building some of these bones for a more plural internet. It requires technology companies to instantiate these principles and how they develop their work, like Anthropic, which just released Claude 3 with a collectively sourced constitution using some of these methods we were describing, Gitcoin, which is funding open source software this way, and of course it requires research, just like this community is doing and many of our partners in the academy are doing, such as the IE University in Spain. So if any of this interests you, scan this QR code, join the community helping us build this book. I won't go on much longer, but I'll just say this book is all open source, no copyright. Anyone is very welcome to contribute. It is governed according to the principles described in the book. Everyone who contributes gets credit, recognition, and the ability to steer the future direction of the project. And I hope many of you will be inspired to contribute either in the next couple of days that you have for the first English print edition or to the evolving document going forward. Thank you so much. Looking forward to your questions and Audrey's responses. So.
Thank you, Glenn. Okay, we're going to bring Audrey up on the live stream, please, and take your questions. And like I mentioned earlier, we're so excited to find out Audrey's joining us a few days ago. So we'll need to restate the question for Audrey. So there's going to be a little bit of a delay. Questions for Glenn or Audrey?
Hi there, Audrey. What's the most successful example of using Polis or other preference aggregation technologies in influencing policy outcomes or setting the agenda in Taiwan so far?
Example of using Polis for influencing policy agenda.
So, do I take this question? Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Polis and Polis-inspired technologies have always been part of Taiwan's e-rulemaking. One of the most widely known is, of course, how it's resolved the UberX issue back in 2015. Just type V Taiwan UberX, but that example is like 9 years ago. As of last year, we've used Polis and as part of an ideathon, which is like hackathon, but for ideas, and ask people to simply imagine how humans co-create with AI systems in the year 2040. And then using a combination of Polis and Talk to the City, another plural technology, it's also open source, we synthesize people's collective imaginations and use that to constitutionally tune the Taiwan trustworthy AI dialogue engine, much as the same way as the Claude 3 system is tuned by Anthropic, responding to Polis questions, actually. So it's a very similar pipeline. It's called Collective Constitutional AI. And just next week, we've sent SMS to hundreds of thousands of Taiwanese citizens, and 400 of them randomly sortitioned, representing a microcosm of our population, will also co-create the boundaries, the red lines for large social media companies to mitigate against the abuse of AI, including liability patterns, including recurrent digital signatures on signatures, and things like that. So I would say that it is not any one single thing that is solved by such plural technologies, but rather a pre-commitment from policymaker that whenever you want to go to a focus group or go to a poll, maybe combine the both and have a wiki survey and have the entire population co-write the poll. Hope that answered the question.
Hi, can you hear, I guess?
We're switching to transcription for obvious reasons, so there'll be a slight delay.
That's okay. India, actually, I'm curious of how much, 1.4 billion population country of India, and then how their approaching technology across the stack, India is actually creating almost every single stack as a public good, because the idea is not just to kind of government deciding everything and predetermining, rather creating the infra layer and let people just play with it entirely, from a farmer in a rural community to a top company that is advancing technology. So how much of that, like both of you, when you were looking at systems broadly, took into account of this public good infrastructure that is entirely driving the digital stack? They're also building an AI stack on that. So I'm just curious on, have you delved deeply on that site? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Is for the India stack as well as the Estonian stack or the Taiwan stack of public code, the idea indeed is not government in a top-down way predetermining its usage. In Taiwan, we stress the idea of modular components. For example, we're now beginning the design of the DID, the Decentralized Identity Wallet. The whole idea of this wallet is not a super app coded by the government, but rather an ecosystem of verifiable credentials, of decentralized identifiers supported by the government without pre-committing to just limit its use to this use or that use. And so I think part of the main design criteria we have is whether this is an international or interoperable standard. And this is also why even as we go public code and designing our stack, we very carefully not go to the single vendor if it's in two adjacent layers. For example, in cybersecurity, when we want to do biometric verification on device, not in the cloud, or when we want to do device authentication or the behavioral cybersecurity detection and so on, we don't go to a single vendor for those three layers of zero trust architecture, because if we do, then they have the incentive of using proprietary protocols and foreclosing even if they agree to release as public code, foreclosing the competitors and international bidders and community-oriented ways to plug and play into those layers. So I think designing with a idea toward modular and super modular cooperation and interoperability is the main response that we have. And there's inspiration from India and Estonia, of course, but Taiwan is also charting our own path.
Great.
Thank you, Audrey. Glenn told us a little bit about the historical, social, and cultural diversity of Taiwan and how that might motivate the need for pluralist technologies and their impacts. I'm curious what you might say about that developmental trajectory. It seems like all of that diversity could have led to less pluralism, but in this case, it's worked out well. And if it's not too sensitive to ask, I'm curious if the broader relationship between Taiwan and mainland China also changes the motivations or effects of pluralism.
Particular, it's not very well known. I mean, Taiwan has more than 20 national languages, 42 indigenous languages in more than 16 different ethnicities. And also the idea of co-creation across diversity is so ingrained in part of the Taiwanese politics now. And this is actually the secret that protects us against foreign information manipulation and meddling. Because if people see that there is a foreign information manipulation going on, then no matter how deeply separated is our internal division, everybody was like, but we want to protect this diversity, and the foreign adversary is trying to undermine the democratic institution that protect this diversity. So by identifying with the diversity, paradoxically, it fuels this internal co-creation like a rotating control explosion, which is, as I understand, one of the new rocket designs nowadays. And that also flies faster and is more energy efficient. So I would say that the effects of pluralism is that of a co-creation attitude that bridges across the political divides. And the most recent example is right after the January presidential legislative election, like all three major parties, supporters feel that they have won because diversity and plurality is preserved in our national government. So it's quite rare for a national level election filled with AI generated foreign manipulation, ended up being everybody loving each other more and liking each other more right after the election.
Audrey made. So if you read the book, you'll see that the usual question around Taiwan is, what is its name? It's often written as the Republic of China, parentheses, Taiwan. And Audrey has found this genius way of actually making those just one thing, which is the traditional Mandarin characters for Republic of China are amidst cultures, citizen nation, which she translates instead as Transcultural Republic of Citizens. Which, by the way, also has initials TROC, which is the same as the Republic of China. And then Taiwan, in the language of the Taiwan people, after whom arguably the island is named, means like meet place, like place to meet. And so like kind of both of them mean this place of bringing together difference. So anyway, that's a beautiful attempt to synthesize these different perspectives.
That's really cool. We're going to take a few more questions, and I'll just ask if you could try to phrase your question in as simple of a way as you possibly can to help with the transcription. That would be awesome.
Hi, Audrey. It's Dayar here from AI Objectives. Thank you for the Talk to the City shout out. My question to you is about using civic tech, especially in contexts where the government is not collaborative. What is your advice towards bottom-up community organization where the enabling tech for coordination can be used in ways that won't get mainstream buy-in for a while from those that are able to, stay in charge?
Until the late 1980s, and it laid the groundwork for a lot of looking after. So sometimes often some of the technology that they use has to be incubated in other places because it's too hard with that kind of adversarial environment, but then it can be adopted by people in there. And one thing I'm very excited about is this project of plural publics, this idea of creating, the simplest way to think about it is just like private group chats, the more sophisticated versions of private group chats that create the ability to coordinate and act without external surveillance. So I think that's a really important technological importance.
I might have a hard time articulating the question, but it strikes me that So the term digital democracy and the idea of creating digital democracy seems very familiar to the feeling that people had in the early 2000s that is now often derided. And what strikes me is that many of the biggest successes of digital democratization are now completely taken for granted, such as the democratization.
And see that as a bad thing in some cases. So how do we both advance the cause of digital democracy, but also in parallel advance a conversation that protects the idea of the enterprise as good and noble in parallel to advancing the cause? Because I think we could advance the cause of digital democracy, but still end up in a world where everyone hates it and kind of wants to tear it down or go back to some imagined past. Does that question make sense? And that could be for either of you.
Do we have Audrey or no? I'll do my best to answer it. I think the most fundamental problem, if I had to pinpoint one that we're facing, is the sociological disconnect between the developers of technology and the societies that they're intended to serve. This disconnect does not exist in anywhere near that form in Taiwan. Gov0 is like deeply integrated with the civic organizations that pervade Taiwanese society and are decidedly less digital than Gov0 is, though they've managed to bring them along with it. This region is not like that. I grew up here. I mean, maybe it's changed. But there is just this severe divide of trust, of connection, of relationships between the sort of people who are in the rooms creating technology and the broader society surrounding them. And that's on both sides. I mean, there's a distrust and an uninterest and anti-intellectualism, you know, in the rest of society. And then there's a sense of exit and separation and we're above it all from the tech world. And we have to overcome that, whether it be through cultural institutions like Muraikon in Japan, whether it be through public investment in technology, whether it be through books like this that welcome the public to help literally write what the future of technology is with technologists. We have to break down those social barriers. We have to balance the investment in building a strong tech community with the investment in building bridging ties to the non-technical communities. We have to go from a situation when about 2% of people in the technology industry are deeply religious and 60% of people in the world are, to one where there's more balance there. So I think, I don't think we're going to get trust and change in the conversation until people feel part and feel agency in what's happening to them and don't feel it's being done to them.
Any other questions? One over here. I think I could hear Audrey again. Oh, okay.
Audrey, Glenn, thank you. I'm curious how you think about, with digital democracy, inclusion of people who may not be very familiar with technology tools. How do you balance giving people who are familiar with digital technology voices against people who maybe aren't so familiar, like older folks?
Audrey, do you want to take that, or are you back?
Mm-hmm. Okay, a great question. So Of course, we need to give voice and unmute to everyone, as demonstrated here. And in Taiwan, we always go where people are instead of asking people to come to technology. And the key here, aside from, of course, universal broadband access as a human right and everything like the basic things, the key here is to help the helpers. Like both of my grandmothers are 90 something now. It's unlikely that they will go to a community college and learn about digital things by themselves. But my parents, who are in their 70s now, are quite familiar with all this stuff and are the primary caretakers to their parents. And so by intentionally empowering those caretakers, and because many of them speak from a different, like non-Mandarin language, so we have to be linguistically maximally inclusive, then we empower those helpers to then help the people who are not familiar with digital technology to nevertheless participate in civic assemblies. One case in point is, for example, we just a few months ago issued $200 US to each and every Taiwanese citizen. And as part of that system, we reused our pandemic inspired infrastructure so that people can choose to go to the post office, or they can choose to go to an ATM, or they can use their phone and go online. And each one is meticulously tested with accessibility in mind. And even for people who don't have a bank account, there is this very straightforward way. And for their local bureau chiefs or the social workers or the caretakers and so on, we make sure that we pre-distribute those materials so that they can act on their behalf, but also eventually also introduce them to the even more time-saving ways of digital, but with each step felt as very small step. Hope that answered the question.
For a country like the US, I don't have the impression that the tech industry has an extremely homogeneous opinion. I think the sociology has an extremely homogeneous opinion. It is further away from society than the tech industry in many ways. So basically, which is going to be the route over which we can create a movement into society that brings it together again and that revives democracy in the digital age?
So I mean, I would agree that the sociological profession in the academy is more homogeneous than is the tech industry. I'm not sure that's particularly relevant because sociological profession has extremely limited power and is very small relative to the overall economic size, and that's less true of the tech industry. The tech industry, I think, is extremely homogeneous. I think it's very hard to deny that. I mean, I think the vast majority of people, both in positions of power and more broadly within the tech industry, are secular, male, highly educated, mostly white or Asian. I could go on with descriptors and you'd get down to about 0.1% of the world population that satisfies all those characteristics. And it's pretty surprising that you would have something that's so central to the whole world dominated by such a sociologically narrow set of people who have social graphs that are not particularly connected to the rest of the societies that they serve. So I think that's an issue. Now, is it the only issue? I don't know, but I think it's a very fundamental one. And how do we get past that? We model it. We just start doing different practices. So, for example, I was asked to take an excerpt from the book and publish it somewhere. I'm going to write that article rather than just taking the excerpt. I'm writing it jointly with the head of President Trump's Council of Evangelical Advisors and a Arab diplomat lady who is like a left-wing Palestinian activist. So we're going to write that together. So that's like, you know, we should try to model it. We should try to like do it in these communities, reach out to different people, include them in these conversations, you know, do these assemblies. All this sort of things are ways to build bridges. So.
Yosha. I know you're targeting me with that comment. So I am a sociologist and a builder of pluralist technologies. And I've studied social psychology quite a bit. And I'll just point out that probably all of us have the bias of overestimating the homogeneity of groups that we are not a member of, first of all. But I also, your point is well taken. And the sociologists really need to get out of their ivory towers and understand the impacts they can make building pluralist technologies.
Any other final one or two questions for Audrey or Glenn?
It's okay to ask another one. Of course, majority of the conversation right now is the current version of humans and human-centric societies. That's flipping very fast, right? My AI agents are working with me. I'm creating my bionic workforce. Not talking about the same rights or unionization and things like that. And that's already at full-on deployment phase within companies. And we produce some of that as part of our company. So how do you associate a non-biological being defined as human and have the agency? Because agents are also need to have agency to perform and decide and make decisions. So how much of that, like overarching expansion of this as a living system that you are taking into consideration? Or are there any experiments that you're doing within the Taiwanese environment or other spaces?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, sorry for the delay. I think the non-biological well-being of what we call natural personhood has always been part of Taiwanese culture. We have the spirit of the land for each and every land is part of the folk Taoist thinking. And just as New Zealand gave the Wanganui River natural personhood, or the Ganges River in India personhood, or in Canada, and so on. There are already legal instruments that take care of non-biological well-being of environments that shares this caretaking or caregiving relationship around animals and humans in that ecosystem. So there are already legal instruments in doing that. And in Taiwan, we are funding a lot of research into, as I mentioned, the decentralized identifiers communities, so that a group not representing, but representing the collectively measured water quality, the collectively measured air quality, and so on. Anyone who imbue care into such a relationship. Many of them may be doing this part-time, but they can feel as they're part of the polity, no matter which part of the jurisdiction they are, because a river naturally crosses jurisdictions. And so, yes, there are presidential hackathon teams, there are civil IoT teams, there are many teams that is working with the indigenous tradition and also the local folk Taoist tradition to not make a either or clear-cut decision on whether this is an autonomous AI system or whether it's just a bunch of people who care about the environment. It could be both if we build such a system that talks as a legal agent on one side, but as a community coalition of data and care on the other side. So there's a part in the book that talks about this in the environmental chapter, and also you can Google for talk to the river, say hi to the river for some prototype that we helped fund. Hope that answered the question.
I just want to encourage anybody who hasn't asked a question, maybe you feel like you're an outsider here and you're afraid that your question is too basic or everyone knows the answer. I just want to encourage you to share your question with us.
Hi, thank you. Something that came up today was how do farmers, construction workers, education workers who are currently in our system being very undervalued and also not part of the tech conversation, I'm wondering how that's played out in Taiwan and if there's been good results.
Okay. I think educators are definitely the most important part in this plurality movement, and that includes people who do on the job educating pedagogy around farms, around construction sites, and so on. The reason why Taiwan switched to a competency-based education circa 2019, as opposed to a literacy-only, like standardized answer, your stereotypical East Asian part, is that learning as part of doing, learning on the job, learning to learn, and so on is essential now, because none of the tools that any field relies on will stay the same for the next decade or so. Everything is constantly changing. So for example, instead of teaching people to defend against information manipulation, to defend against fraud and scam and so on, we have even the primary school teachers who work with the children to measure air quality and participate in collective journalism, to do fact-checking around presidential candidate debates and so on. And so they are more and more, especially the civics teachers, but also the teachers in all levels of education, including lifelong, they are going to take a very different stance instead of judging or rating or scoring students on the basis of their individual performance. Like it's all capstone projects now. The students are encouraged to reach across different teams, different disciplines, and so on, and create something that is of value to society. It could be a citizen's petition to ban plastic straws from bubble tea takeouts, which is mobilized by people under 18, and then that become part of their education. So I would say yes to all the educators that want to flip a literacy-based, which is consumer-based education, to a competence-based, which is also combined with practical knowledge in their curriculum. And Taiwan has quite successfully transitioned to that new sort of Scandinavian, some people say that, curriculum. Hope that answered the question somewhat.
Final question. Did you still have one?
No, I'm getting nervous. Final question. I mean, Audrey, listening to this is all quite impressive. I'm just wondering how cultural is what's happening in Taiwan. I mean, the use of technology, and how exportable is it? I mean, the systems you developed, Paulus and all that, to what extent can they be implemented in Germany or in the US? And I have to admit, I'm a bit skeptical.
Audrey, which is to say, because I'm supposed to be the exporter here, the thing that's fascinating about Taiwanese history is Polis, but also Henry George and John Dewey, who have been two of the most important influences on the trajectory in Taiwan, happen all to be Americans. So Taiwan may be an exporter, but it's actually also an importer. And it's like a re-exporter, I guess, right? And so it's a great testing ground for how these things can work, but these things come from all over the place. Can they scale? I don't know. Maybe Audrey has something to say about that. But these, it's not just like it's Taiwan off on its own. It's Taiwan as part of a cycle of development and scaling and refining and social application. But Audrey?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're not the originator for pretty much any of the technology, the civic tech we're about today, right? Polis came from Occupy Seattle. Lumio came from New Zealand. Participatory budgeting, of course, from Brazil, but also from Barcelona and Madrid. Our e-petition platform came from Iceland. And so think of us as just a tentacle, right, of this internet ethos. The ethos of co-creation across very different networks. It's a network of networks. So this is not about exporting our intranet configuration on the foreign jurisdictions, not about this at all, but rather about the interoperable protocols that we adopt that can co-create energy from social differences without rendering them monotone over time, without having the same social division over time, repeated and again, but rather create new coalitions and new allies and new different lines of debate and so on, whenever and however people want to set it in the here and now, instead of putting everything into the same 4-year election cycle or 2-year referenda cycle, having a continuous democracy platform where through petitions and hackathons and ideathons and so on, every grassroots organization have some way to set the power of agenda setting. And I know, as a matter of fact, that many Western countries have such a community tradition, has a real public square, has locally trusted media or public library or public radio or consumer protection associations or things like that. It was just that these social facilitating technologies was not thought of as a natural ally to the cutting edge large language models or extended reality or whatever newest technology is. So by framing plurality as something that very carefully joins the democracy practitioners and open source and cutting edge technology experiments, we're basically saying these two are actually the same people. And I think this part is exportable because it's just an idea. It's not any particular position or ideology or culture. Hope that answered your question.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Audrey, for joining us. And Glen. Thank you all for coming. Hope you'll stick around, hang out, have more good conversations. We've got some yummy food and drinks. If you want to help clean up, we would love help folding chairs. We would love help bringing bean bags back into here. Abby's in the back. She's the boss, so if you want to help, she can give you some jobs. But definitely, whether you want to help clean up or not, stick around, help us eat some food and have some yummy drinks. And thank you all for coming and hope to see you again.